Welcome in to Daily Faceoff Live, your go-to source for everything hockey. Live every weekday at noon Eastern.
Welcome in, live from beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada, another draft week edition of Daily Faceoff Live, streaming live on the Daily Faceoff YouTube, where we are looking for your inbox questions. So feel free to fire those our way. We are, as always, brought to you by Bet365, the largest sports betting platform globally. Download the app today, get in on a wide range of markets, and use the promo code DAILY365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it is never ordinary at Bet365. And Frank, as we continue to inch closer to the first round of the NHL draft, I'm starting to get the sense this won't really be an ordinary week either.
Nothing about this is ordinary, just like Bet365. Okay, like that?
Great tie-in. Great tie-in.
So, look, there's so much happening today. Today, the buyout window opens. We've got teams that aren't going to be qualifying some players. We've got some salary cap machinations. Ilya Mikayev on the move last night. And there's definitely going to be a few things that we don't expect that pop today that just end up happening because it's as unpredictable as a night in Vegas.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dig into first what we saw yesterday around the NHL. Frank, starting with the cap dump made by Jim Rutherford, Patrick Allvin, and the Vancouver Canucks. It's Ilya Mikayev and Sam Lafferty going back to the Chicago Blackhawks and, money retained, things like that. But it basically boils down to the Canucks move from a second to a fourth rounder to get off of some pretty significant salary.
This was a huge piece of business for the Canucks, and it's not just about this one. They had to swallow hard to make the Mikayev deal. They felt like this is a good enough player that 1 year away from ACL tear that he'd be bouncing back in a big way. So they did not want to attach an asset to it. The fact that they were able to, yes, trade the second round pick, they essentially slide back 60 slots in the draft in 2027. You not only have the ability to go out and find another 2027 second round pick if you want to replenish your draft board between now and then, but way more importantly, what this does is opens up the Vancouver Canucks to re-sign Nikita Zadorov, to take a run at Jake Guentzel when free agency opens on July 1. That's their game plan. Whether or not they can pull everything off, it was all going to be impossible to do on their cap with Ilya Mikayev still on there at $4.75 million.
So you think it's now possible for them to get Guentzel and Zadorov done and maybe have Tyler Myers sitting off to the side going, I'll take the scraps, guys?
Potentially. I'm not saying Tyler Myers is definitely going to, sit and wait idly while this all happens. I think he really likes it in Vancouver and wants to stay, but I think the Canucks are way more focused on the two other guys. Mm-hmm. Zadorov was a huge part of their playoff push, literally huge. And Guentzel, they view as the game-breaking winger that could potentially unlock Elias Pettersson again. What was the big storyline to the Canucks playoff run as they got to Game 7 against the Oilers? It was what happened to Elias Pettersson, but then so many Canucks fans and maybe even some people internally were saying, but is he this bad, or are we just playing him with bad line mates? And Ilya Mikayev, all playoffs long, he scored 1 goal in his final 60 games as a Canuck. He was where scoring chances went to die. So they had to make some moves this summer, and it was way more important from a cap perspective to get that done, to be able to open up the door to everything else.
It's very easy to see why Jake Guentzel would be a good fit there. Rutherford, Allvin, as I mentioned, they don't like to sit on their hands, Frank, and that is good news for people like us who need to talk about this sport for a living. They always keep it entertaining. The buyout window opens today in the NHL, and I don't believe there was any waiver activity today, but a couple of names that we're keeping an eye on around the league. One of them is Ryan Suter, veteran defenseman out in Dallas. He's had an up and down ride with the Dallas Stars, and if the buyout does go through, it would save the Stars $1.4 million, and it would put Suter in an interesting class. He'd be on 2 buyouts at the same time in Minnesota and Dallas. But does this move make sense for the Stars?
I think it does for a number of reasons. One, the Stars are scrounging in couch cushions for as much salary cap space as they can find. They'd like to try and find a way to keep Chris Tanev. They'd like to find a way to keep Sam Steele. Who knows what's going to happen with Scott Wedgwood, the wedge wall, and their backup goalie to Jake Ottinger. They are pinching pennies, and Suter was a way to easily save a few $1,000,000. And when you look at Suter's play in the playoffs, he's held up fine during the regular season. When it gets to another level, he's just long in the tooth, and he doesn't have the ability to keep up at this point in time. Could he latch on somewhere as a third pair defenseman for minimal money? I'm sure he could. Will he call it a career? This is a guy he leaves that buyout in Minnesota and goes to Dallas and signs a 4-year deal that we knew at the time. We're like, 4 years for Suter now? Why? And he was pretty good for the most part of it. And even in the first couple of years, really good. But this was a necessary move for the Stars. Also, credit to Jeff Marek from Sportsnet, who was all over the Suter buyout. Yep. We had 9 players on our buyout watch list to kick off the offseason a couple weeks back. Suter has, trending toward the buyout or will be bought out today. He's the first one, but think about some of the other guys on our list. PL Dubois, he was traded. Eunice Corpusalo, he was traded. There's one other guy that was on our board that ended up Mikayev. He ended up, no, Mikayev wasn't a buyout option. There was one other buyout, like of the 9, 4 now are off the board. So it goes to show you these were problematic contracts. I think you should keep an eye out today on the New York Islanders. What do they do with JG Pageau? Is it a buyout? Is it a trade? They have basically $6 million to sign 6 players to fill out their roster. That's not nearly enough. And Pageau at that $6 million figure would be an easy way to create more. Do they trade an asset? They acquired an extra second-round pick. Is this the way they do it? Or do they exercise the buyout and move on? Either way, I think he's a prime target and candidate in New York.
Interesting. Pageau, a name to watch. Jeff Skinner, a name to watch in Buffalo. We hear rumblings, and this is maybe, and we're doing smoke or fire later, but what's the word on Skinner and a potential buyout?
Yeah, so I would say there's smoke there, because when you're asked the question and you're the GM and Kevin Adams and you don't say no, you always have to allow for the possibility. But for the life of me, I cannot make sense of this. Why the buyout? Why now? 1 year ago, the Buffalo Sabres, Skinner had 82 points.
And if you go by the 100K per point kind of logic, he was barely overpaid.
So, but yeah, no one's saying it's a good contract. No. But the point is, the Sabres finished 23rd in the league in goals last year. Why are you deleting 25 goals off your roster at a minimum when you don't have any cap issues? I don't personally understand it. If they did it, unless there's some kind of problem with Jeff Skinner, he's hurting your culture. I don't think that's
seems
the
loved
case.
there.
Yeah, I don't think that's the case. So for me, at least to get through one more year is important for a future cap perspective. But I got to tell you, if you're Kevin Adams and you're sitting in this role and you are 5 years into the rebuild of the rebuild, you're probably sitting here going, I don't know how many years I'm going to have left. So I got to, try and make hay right now. I just don't know why deleting Jeff Skinner, regardless of what the cap hit is, it's irrelevant to me because they don't have cap issues.
Exactly.
That I'm not going about deleting 25 goals from my team.
If I was running the show there and my GM came out to me and said, I'm buying out Jeff Skinner, do I have your approval? I would look at the cap friendly. I'd go, you have $24 million in cap space. You can't solve our problems with $24 million. What are you going to do with this Jeff Skinner money? Go sign more bad contracts? Like, I don't understand it at all. I think you should be able to solve the problems you have in Buffalo, considering you also have the 2 young and should be cost-controlled goalies. Boom, get those 2 done. Goaltending's fixed. Your blue line's cost-controlled. You have $24 million to go find offense. Figure it out.
I'm just really sad that you mentioned cap friendly. We only have until next Friday.
I know. I'm cherishing.
Cap friendly goes offline.
I'm cherishing every moment we have with our friends at Cap Friendly. All right, those are 2 buyouts we're keeping an eye on. There is a third, but it ties into the Oilers. Jack Campbell. Are you surprised that here on day 1 we haven't heard anything about Campbell being bought out, or is it just whatever formality? There's other things to go on, or other things going on in Edmonton.
The Oilers have also they've been through the ringer in the last 72 hours. Not that this hasn't been on their radar. You still need to call the player and inform. I believe this is happening. I haven't heard, unless there's someone taking on Jack Campbell's contract, which is going to be really expensive. It's going to cost the Oilers a real asset for a team that they're not overflowing with draft picks. They don't have their first this year. They don't have their second next year. You're not trying to, I think, solve this Campbell issue on your cap by throwing draft picks at it. The most logical play still is to clear $2.8 million in cap space this summer when you're already dealing with an overage from the Connor Brown deal. this makes sense. So they've got a lot happening. They need to get from the cup final and dealing with their injuries and personnel stuff to then, okay, what about Ken Holland? We know that Ken Holland's moving on. They issued a statement this morning. This is no surprise. We've known for 2 years that Ken Holland was entering the last year of his deal and very likely wouldn't end up returning to the Oilers. That ends up playing out. They thank him for his services. But in the meantime, there's this transition, and then you've got a lot of business to take care of in a real short period of time.
Yeah, and still, obviously, it's an important summer for everyone, but certainly for the Oilers, who will be looking to keep a big chunk of this core around, but also kind of tinker around the edges, I think, is the approach in Edmonton.
And some other UFAs to sign on your own team.
Yeah, Connor Brown, Matthias Janmark, those are two guys who both said yesterday at exit interviews they would love to be back. Adam Henrique says
Corey Perry. I mean, like, they've got a lot going on that they're probably they said yesterday, I think, that they're going to end up keeping 3 to 4 of their UFAs. They've got work to do.
They do. Yeah. See what ends up happening on the blue line. Darnell Nurse is on your trade targets board. Cody Ceci could be a cap casualty. Vincent Desharnais, one of those aforementioned UFAs. So lots to go on in Edmonton, but it will, as you said, not be Ken Holland calling the shots this summer. It'll be Jeff Jackson. Yeah. All right.
We think, unless they are talking to a candidate that has not made it into the news, which is entirely possible, and they've kept it under wraps for the last number of weeks. But I'd assume that right now, given this critical juncture, they're going to go with Jeff Jackson, who's the head of the department, who has been there for the entire season, and is well suited to be able to make the decisions.
All right, let's move along and let's address some rumors, Frank, in a new edition of Smoke or Fire. I throw you a rumor, you tell me if there is smoke, fire, or if it is a false alarm. And let's start with draft talk to begin. The Calgary Flames and trading up. Smoke, fire, or false alarm?
Fire.
Oh.
They to be honest, they're one of a few teams that you could also see trade back depending on how the board goes. Like, they've got a list of guys that they really like. They're obviously really paying close attention to Tidge Ginla and where he ends up going. They know him better than anyone. Jerome McGinley works in their organization. He's been one of Craig Conroy's closest friends for a long time. I'm sure there's some internal and external pressure for them in their market. Hey, what happens with Tidge Ginla? But I don't know that that's necessarily the only guy that they have their sights set on. What happens if the board breaks a certain way and pick a guy, Demidov, is available at a lower spot than they thought? Do the Flames jump up and try and get that player? Do they have the assets and ability to do so? That's the other part of the equation. Craig Conroy's assembled a ton of picks based on the players that he moved off of. He's got some capital to work with, but he'd have to really push. And it's also, depending on the way the board breaks, it's not necessarily a guarantee that a team like Columbus, for instance, would be willing to do that.
Frank, the Utah Hockey Club, Bill Armstrong, the shackles are off. He is free to spend like a drunken sailor if he chooses. Them finding a top pairing defenseman. That is apparently the rumor. That is what they're hunting for. Smoke, fire, false alarm. Will they be able to do it if they want to?
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, why not? I mean, you've got the ability, you've got the assets, you've got the want and need to go out and do it. I think that they'd be well positioned as anyone to try and chase that.
He is low on your trade targets board, but I want to ask him about you again because I see the chat is buzzing a bit. Trevor Zegras, is that just smoke for right now still, or are you willing to push that into fire?
I would say that is smoke.
Okay.
Look, the smoke has been around since November. I was the guy that reported then that they had engaged in conversations about Trevor Zegras with other teams, and he's obviously such a talented player. The issue is, what's the interest from the Zegras end to try and make something happen? That's the part that I don't think enough people have keyed in on. I think there's been enough friction there with everything that's played out. Let me walk you through his last year. He was hurt. He started the year late because they were grinding him down on his contract. And then he finally gets signed. They trade his best friend in Jamie Drysdale. Like, it's been one thing after the other for Trevor Zegras in Anaheim. I don't think it's been comfortable. I think he's gotten the sense that other teams have gotten, that maybe Pat Verbeek thinks that he's a little bit one-dimensional and they'd like to see more from him. There's a lot going on there with Zegras and Anaheim. I just don't know if a deal like that is able to materialize in such a short period of time right now. Here's the other thing I'll throw at you, and I mentioned this yesterday. There's a bunch of deals this summer that could take some time. Like I'm talking late July, August to materialize. And I would say that Zegras is one of those on the list.
So GMs may be going to the cottage, but they're bringing the work phone with them, is what you're saying?
If they have reception.
If they have reception. Zegras rounds out your trade targets board, Frank. You updated it yesterday, so let's dig into it a little bit more in today's edition of Icebreakers. Oh, are we going icebreakers? I think we are, Frank. All right, we're good to go. Let's start with the new name up at the top, or close to the top, I should say. Jacob Trouba joins your list. Frank, what's the latest there, and what's the word on the Rangers moving the guy who is number 8 on your list?
Well, the New York Rangers are just weighing all their options. They love what Jacob Trouba brings to their team, but they're also aggressive as aggressive as any team in the league in trying to improve. Chris Drury's made that clear since he took over. And when you look at Trouba, I think what a lot of people would be surprised to see is because there's only 2 years left on his deal, there's actually positive trade equity. If you're a team that's been outside of the playoff picture for the last number of years, Trouba is one of those guys that can help get you in. So yeah, $8 million a year. It's not pretty in terms of the cap hit, but a lot of those teams have cap space and it's not really a huge issue. The big part of it is Trouba a guy that interests them? I think there's been enough trade interest so far, and the Rangers are gaining some added flexibility. He has a 15-team no trade clause. He drops down from full no trade to 15 starting on Monday. They want to try and make some moves. It's not a definite that Trouba gets moved, but he's certainly one guy whose name has come up in multiple conversations. Capo Caco is still there as a potential to be moved as well. But Trouba has certainly garnered some interest. Is a team like Detroit? We've seen them move money around. He's a Michigan native. Does that make sense?
I'm just going to connect everyone to Utah. That's going to be my play with all of this. So Utah for Trouba is my guess. Down at number 10 on your list, very fitting, you have top 10 picks and a handful of teams who could be looking to move them. Ottawa, New Jersey, Columbus in there as well. That was actually going to be one of our Ask DFO questions. So someone was throwing it in the chat about Columbus at 4. But out of those 3, is there one that's more likely than the other to move?
Ottawa, Columbus. Did you say New Jersey?
Yeah, you have New Jersey on there.
Yeah, New Jersey, I think that's a fascinating one because the Devils, when you look at where they're heading, it's not that they don't need the number 10 overall pick. Of course, you can use that player to assimilate to your team 2-3 years from now, but this is a core that's ready to win, I think. And when you look at the young defensemen that they have coming, Nemitz, Hughes, they just added Seamus Casey from college, plus a healthy Dougie Hamilton. Like you've got a core there, but you need more help. I think you certainly need some more veteran presence. That's a given. But what can they do with that 10 overall pick now that can help them in the here and now with the right? I'm not saying go out and get a 32-year-old, but is there a 25-year-old, a Marty Necas, for instance, and league sources, as I reported yesterday, indicated that the Devils could potentially part with that number 10 overall pick in a deal for Marty Necas. That's something that maybe not roster-wise makes a lot of sense for me, but when you think about like age range and where he's at, 71-point season under his belt, like that's another guy that you go, oh, that's really interesting.
Buffalo at 11 in Necas. They need
also
scoring.
A possibility. Like again, it's go time. You can't win a round if you're the New York Rangers or New Jersey Devils. Take a step back and then you're not in the mix. You got to get back there.
And of course, Utah, a team to keep an eye on there.
God.
Last name I wanted to throw your way, obviously at the top, Mitch Marner. Brad Tree Living spoke yesterday. Did you take anything substantial from those Tree Living quotes when it comes to how this Marner process could be playing out?
Nothing at all.
Or is that smoke?
I'd say it's not even smoke. It's like it's almost bordering on false alarm is what we're talking about. Because here's the situation, and I explained this in depth today, as you mentioned on the rundown with Jason Gregor. It is what they're saying all the right things, which is there is no reason to get into a battle with Mitch Marner and his full no trade clause until you have something to get into a battle for. You need someone to step up and show real interest and also be willing to pay a price that you believe is commensurate to the value that you think Mitch Marner brings to your team. That's why it's not an easy transaction, but I can guarantee you 100% that this week here in Vegas and for the last couple weeks, the Toronto Maple Leafs have been engaging in discussions and talks with teams. Are you interested in Marner? What would it look like? Then, if and only if someone steps up and gets to that point where you think that you can make a deal, hopefully you get multiple on the table so that you can then go back to the Marner camp and begin to wrestle with them. There's nothing to talk about until then. There's no reason to say anything publicly otherwise. There's no reason to say anything to the Marner camp otherwise. You wait, you hold your cards, and then you go play them should you decide to see a hand that fits for you.
What's the saying? You don't let the tail wag the dog or something like that?
Well,
something like that.
That's one potentiality, but here's the thing, and this should be no surprise to any Maple Leafs fans just from a pure asset management perspective. If you are not re-signing Mitch Marner, you have to do something this summer because you're not letting him walk for free, a player of that magnitude next summer.
Mm-hmm.
This is not rocket science, and it's not a surprise.
No, not at all. All right, there you go. That is a wrap on this week's edition of Icebreakers and the latest trade targets. Along to our daily face-off inbox question. It's brought to you by Douglas Mattress. Frank, if I look tired today, it's because we're down here in Vegas and I'm not at home sleeping on my Douglas. You can sleep as good as me by heading to douglas.ca/DFO. Take advantage of the mattress and free bedding bundle. Frank, your Ask DFOs, I'm pulling them up right now. Our chat is absolutely bumping right now. Ben is in. He wants to know which goalies are still on the carousel and could be moved, and maybe which teams are looking to get involved still.
So you've got Philip Gustafsson in Minnesota.
And he slid down your list a little bit over the last
He slid
few
down
updates.
because no one has really shown the interest to this point. We've also had the number of teams dwindle in the goalie market. You're looking at Toronto, you're looking at Detroit, and they've been talking about John Gibson with Anaheim, and you're looking at maybe Colorado. Like, the list of teams that are looking for goalies is not very long. There are options in free agency depending on your budget. You've got Cam Talbot and Scott Wedgwood and Casey DeSmith, and
Laurent
Lauren
Brossoit
Brossoit is going to be hugely in demand. A lot of people think that Brossoit could be destined for Toronto when it's all said and done. A Brossoit and Joe Wall tandem, for instance. But you're talking about UC Saros potentially, and certainly some reporting to be done on Saros over the next 48 to 72 hours. You're talking about Gustafsson. But you're talking about a lot of teams that have already gone out to this point and are not really willing to engage in the game of goaltending musical chairs. Markstrom goes to New Jersey. Kemper goes to LA. Olmark goes to Ottawa. That really solved a lot of the problems that some of these teams were looking at in net.
Boxing fan is in, and it's fitting. We were in Las Vegas, so let me ask you a Golden Knights question. Any update on Marchessault? Any read on where that could head?
They are trying like hell to get Jonathan Marchessault signed. It's been a grind. They need cap space. They're another team that could potentially be looking at moving a player here or there to make it happen. Chandler Stevenson is an all but certainty to be gone. And I think they can pull it off with Marchessault. They've worked miracles in Vegas before, but the clock is ticking.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's move along to our daily bets. It's brought to you by Bet365, the largest sports betting platform globally. Again, you can sign up today, get in on a huge range of markets by using that promo code DAILY365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Frank, I'm almost turning this into like a hybrid Ask DFO, but I was interested to fire up Bet365 this morning and see odds on where Steven Stamkos will be playing to begin next season. The Tampa Bay Lightning are overwhelming favorites.
They should be.
80% implied odds is that.
I would agree with that.
My question was higher or lower.
Oh,
you think it's bang on? You think Bet365 nailed it?
Yeah, I think that's actually pretty appropriate. And by the way, based on what I'm hearing about how the draft board is shaking out, it's amazing what Vegas knows. I'll say that.
Interesting.
I'll just give you a little hint on that, because I was actually talking to a GM about this yesterday afternoon, and I said, "Would you believe this is how they're seeing it?" And he said, "Yes." And there's some really surprising things if you really pay attention closely to the odds. But he was also saying, did you watch a couple years ago with Slavkovsky and how in the hours before the draft, he absolutely rocketed in odds?
Interesting. Just quickly to wrap up the Stamkos thing, since we had the board there, the teams who come after Tampa Bay were Detroit and Nashville. Is there one team that you think stands out as maybe not someone who has interest or whatever, but just someone you look at and go, man, he'd look good there. He'd be a good fit there.
I could see Nashville making a lot of sense. Patrick Kane tried the Detroit thing. The Steve Yzerman connection is obviously real. Going back to his time in Tampa, there would be a trust factor there. I think, Steven, you go back to your classic Utah thing. I mean, there's a million options for Stamkos. I just think when you look at him being a Mount Rushmore player for the Tampa Bay Lightning, this is a guy that they got to move contracts. Tanner Jeannot, he's on our trade targets board. He's got to go. I still can't really understand why the Ryan McDonough deal, they decided to basically chew up a huge part of their cap to get him. That's money that could have been devoted to Stamkos. You could have been done. And I don't think Stamkos is asking for the sun, the moon, and the stars. I think this is just, no one has told me this officially. My assumption and belief is that something in the 3 years times $6 million range, like that probably should be enough to get it done.
Pavelski-esque when you look at the deal he signed last in Dallas.
Well, yeah, and Pavelski, he also did a series of 1-year deals.
Yeah.
We'll see.
We'll see. All right, let's move along, wrap up the show with a little bit of garbage time, and it is brought to you by us. A reminder, we are going to be going live with our daily Faceoff free agent special on July 1st, 11 a.m. Eastern until 2 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be myself. It's going to be Frank, the return of the Insider Cam. You get to watch Frank up in the top corner of your screen as he tries to break trades and signings. Colby Cohn, Carter Hutton, a couple former NHLers, and a bunch of friends from around the league will be joining us for our free agent special. You will not want to miss it. It's why you should be hitting the subscribe button on the YouTube channel. Frank, garbage time today. I wanted to give a little plug to our boy Stephen Ellis. It is draft week after all, and he wrote a really cool story today. There has never been a player born in Norway picked in the first round of the NHL draft. This year, there could be two with Michael Bransing-Nygaard and Stian Solberg. It's a pretty cool story for two guys, and it's just another reminder of why I love this week. And I mean, Colby Cohn, Johnny Lazarus, they're coming up in Morning Cup of Hockey. They're going to have a bunch of the draft prospects coming on their show over the next 2 days. But it's dreams coming true, man. And for two young kids from Norway, a chance to make history for their country. It's pretty neat.
Just impressed that you were able to pronounce those names correctly. And more than that, really impressed with Stephen Ellis. Seriously, go to our draft hub today on dailyfaceoff.com. I'm not joking. There's 100 stories for you to dive into if you're into the draft. Check that out today. And we have 1 or 2 minutes. Give me another askdfo.
Oh, you want me to dig back into the YouTube?
Yeah.
I was going to tell you my favorite draft story from last year, and it's when Jason Gregor and I were walking to the draft, and someone stopped him and said, "Oh, are you guys in town for the draft?" And they looked at me, looked back at Gregor, and said, "Oh, is this your client? Is he a draft pick?" And I was like, "Well, no, I'm 25, but I wish."
That's quite the compliment. I don't think anyone's
fair
ever
enough.
said that to me at any point.
All right, Maddie's in. Ask DFO. Where does Rutger McGroarty go? Any team that you see as a fit?
Ooh, all I know is that it's in the Jets' best interest to make that happen this week if they can. It's going to be hard to get equal value. 14th overall pick from 2 years ago. You don't want this to turn nasty. I don't think you want the trade value to be devalued in the future. It's going to be a really tough Michigan team next year with all the players that left. So I think you want to try and get that done as soon as you can.
Just again, reading in order. Nurse to Utah, Campbell to Utah. The Utah stuff is buzzing, Frank.
It's all your fault.
Yeah, it definitely is. Darnell Nurse, earlier today, I asked you on the DFO rundown, percent chance he's traded. I see a handful of Oilers fans in here asking about that as well.
I said 25%. I know Jason Gregor said 5. It's maybe the true answer is somewhere in between. It's a greater than 0% chance. I think they'd have to retain some money, and I think it's in their best interest to potentially do everything they can to get out in front of it. Look at what their cap picture is going to be looking like 2 years from now. In a good case scenario, if you're able to keep all these guys. Connor McDavid, these are all hypotheticals. Connor McDavid, $16 million. Leon Draisaitl, 14. Evan Bouchard, 10. That's $40 million. Darnell Nurse at 9.25 doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Not when he's playing second pair minutes.
Okay, last one quickly in under a minute, Frank, and then we'll give away to the Morning Cup of Hockey guys here on the DFO YouTube. Izzy, any update on the Shabbat rumors?
Steve Stais, the GM and president of the Ottawa Senators, said yesterday that there is zero truth to Thomas Chabot being in talks or being on the move. So that means keep an eye out on Jacob Chychrun, because I've been saying forever, you cannot devote $24 million to the left side of your defense.
All right, there you go. That is a wrap on today's edition of Daily Faceoff Live, brought to you by Bet365. And keep it locked right here on the Daily Faceoff YouTube. Johnny Lazarus, Colby Cohn coming up in a couple of minutes with Morning Cup of Hockey. And then Frank and I will be back right here tomorrow, noon Eastern time on draft day. Chat with you then.
Thanks for tuning in to Daily Faceoff Live. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to never miss an episode.